you know, it's Promerops Awards are kind of modeled after the Owl Awards of BirdLife South Africa. And these are the 3 awards that we are giving tonight. They have been carved by one of the people who sits at Jubilee Square in Simonstown, and I can really recommend that if you like the look of these, that you visit him. He and his brother both have a stand there, and they work pretty much hand in hand. So these are people who have made a special contribution to our club. And the first is Felicity Elmore. Felicity deserves a Promerops Award in recognition of all that she has done for the Cape Bird Club and generally for birding. Apart from being a very keen and accomplished birder, Felicity is currently the Secretary of the Conservation Committee, a position she's held in excess of 10 years. She is an active member of that committee in roles other than that of secretary and assists whenever she can. She also compiled the special sightings column in Promerops from 2007 until 2018, so 11 years. In addition to this, she leads CBC outings, and it was she who recce'd and introduced the club to the much enjoyed Gansekral walk. And she also assists with Kirstenbosch walks when she is asked to do so. She's an active citizen scientist and has been fully involved for many years in various counts, both in Cape Town and further afield, such as the quack counts at Longabaan Lagoon, the Berg River, Sunflame Nature Reserve, Redain Dam, and others. She is without doubt the club's top atlaser, having submitted over 1,250 full protocol atlas cards, a remarkable achievement. She does not atlas only local pentads, but is prepared to travel further afield to cover many under-atlased pentads. She also promotes atlasing to other birders, and it is through her that many others have become involved. Bird ringing is another of Felicity's passions. She regularly rings birds at Paarl Bird Sanctuary, even though there are security problems there, Rondevlei Nature Reserve, and elsewhere when required. And at these ringing sessions, she's always happy to explain what she is doing, particularly to interested youngsters. Birds, their monitoring and their conservation are all important to Felicity. Although she recently retired, all through her busy full-time teaching career, she gave every free moment she had to her passions, and she continues to do so. She is an ardent citizen scientist, and recently I just happened to be browsing on the internet and saw her face on a BDI talk, on one of these Zoom meetings, and I gathered that she had attended a biobash. The Biodiversity and Development Institute is a non-profit company of which Les Underhill is the director. And so she has, for that institute, assisted in data collection and bird mapping and taking photographs for the virtual museums. Felicity, thank you for all you do, and congratulations on being awarded your Promerops Award. I will get this to you as soon as I am able. The next recipient is Margaret McIver. Margaret McIver is no stranger to most people in the Cape Bird Club. Probably every member of the club knows of and in some way follows Margaret. whether through the outings she's led, her many posts on the Cape Bird Club Facebook page, or through reading the articles that she has written about her birding encounters in both our own Promerops magazine and in BirdLife South Africa's South Africa's African BirdLife magazine. She's also been a presenter at several Cape Bird Club photographic evenings, at which she has held audiences spellbound by her stories behind the photographs she's showing. That is the mark of Margaret. She tells stories. She regularly leads outings for the club, her speciality being walks on the Constantia Greenbelts, and she also assists with leading the Kirstenbosch garden walks. She arguably knows the position of almost every sparrowhawk nest in the southern suburbs and loves to share that information with others. That is in part because she used to assist Anne Kuslach and her team monitoring the black sparrowhawk nests on the Cape Peninsula as part of the Raptor Research Program. Sorry, I'm just admitting somebody else. Part of the Raptor Research Program at the Fitzpatrick Institute. She continues on her own to observe these and new nests regularly and shares these observations in her many writings. For the last 24 years, Margaret has served on the Entaka Island Blowfly Committee as their avifaunal expert, and she continues to do so. This quiet and unassuming lady deserves fully her Promerops Award. Well done, Margaret. And now the next Promerops Award winner is probably going to be cross with us. It is Johann Schliebusch. Johann, the committee decided to nominate you because as we move further and further away from the last international tour, we are frightened that that role, that very, very important role that you played, will be forgotten. So Johann Schliebusch has served on the committee since 2013, and he is an invaluable part of it. He brings his business acumen to those meetings. He became chairman in 2015, and he continues to serve as chairman. He brings to the committee a great deal of management expertise and his skills as a strategic thinker. He has enabled the committee to be far more businesslike and proactive, and has a wonderful way of getting things going again when we become stuck on a problem. He just has that knack of looking at something from another point of view. He led for 8 years a flagship offering of the Cape Bird Club, the international tours. In 2008, as part of the 70th CBC birthday celebrations, he attended the Madagascar tour led by Ian Sinclair. That trip made quite a few people enthusiastic to do more, and a subcommittee was set up, which was chaired by Johann. While the committee made the decisions where to go, it was Johann who did the lion's share of the organization that made the tours happen. The flights, accommodation, hiring of local guides, and so on. And the list of the Cape Bird Club international tours includes Ethiopia, Ecuador, Ghana, Sri Lanka, Costa Rica, Uganda, and the last tour, of course, was to Thailand in 2018, at which point Johann felt that he needed to step down. One of his travel companions had this to say: Johann was not only an easygoing traveling companion, but he showed true leadership in the way he handled the inevitable logistical problems. As well as becoming vice chairman in 2015, he became chairman of the Courses Committee, a responsibility he still holds. The courses he has arranged have all been huge successes and have covered a wide variety of topics catering to many different interests. His committee together decide on a topic, but it is Johan that engages the speaker and ensures that the logistics for the day are all catered for. Many of you do not know that Johan is very involved in the leadership of an organization called Cool Play, a very successful NPO that through sports training sessions in formerly disadvantaged schools aims to achieve the transformation of young individuals so that they learn to love sport and through the life skills they learn are equipped for successful and meaningful lives. His belief in the importance of reaching disadvantaged youngsters through meaningful activities has spread over to the Cape Bird Club. It is Johan who is the driving force behind the education program in the Cape Bird Club, which started 3 years ago in 2 schools. Until COVID-19 reared its head, this program was on the up and up with expansion plans. And there is no doubt that as soon as we're able to resume our youth activities, Johan will be there. He has, through his Cool Play links, managed to put birding guides in some of the libraries at Cool Play schools, so spreading the message of birding to places we might not otherwise have reached. And in addition to all the above, he has for a number of years played an important role as the champion scorer in the end-of-year quizzes, which has enabled those annual events to run very smoothly. And the way he does it has also contributed to the competitive fun. So, Johan, the rest of the committee want you to know how much we value you and all you do for us. You fully deserve this award. And as I said before, we feel we needed to present it before the wonderful memories of those international tours faded away. Thank you and well done, Johan. Congratulations. That is the end of our AGM part of our meeting. And we now have a very short talk by Monique du Plessis. Monique du Plessis has just handed in her master's thesis at the Percy Fitzpatrick, and she is a birder, and she's very, very interested in how different components of ecosystems interact and how human activity affects its balance. And so this topic on the effect of sugar water feeders and human provision of a food source ultimately affects pollination processes in wild plants. And she's looked at whether they affect those plant populations out in the wild. So Monique grew up in Cape Town and she loves Fynbos. She loves animals. She actually, when we had an earlier practice session, explained that she's interested in anything to do with nature. And it was almost a chance hearing of a thesis possibility that led her to move into the Percy Fitzpatrick. So Monique, I'm going to stop screen sharing and I'm going to give you screen sharing. And thank you very much. By the way, Monique's talk is pre-recorded and it is about 19 or 20 minutes long.
Thank you, Priscilla. Thank you for the introduction and for this opportunity. I will share my screen now. Just let me know if you can't hear the recording or see anything.
Hi Hi everyone, my name is Monique du Plessis and I'm a master's student at the Fitzpatrick Institute of African Ornithology, and my project is funded by SANBI. At the FITS, I am part of a research team that focuses on bird pollination in the Cape Fynbos. Specifically, we investigate how anthropogenic effects change ecosystem services provided by nectarivorous birds. And with my study, I assess how artificial nectar feeders affect bird-plant mutualisms in the Cape Fynbos. Wild bird feeding is a multi-billion-dollar global industry, which has yet its implications for conservation are poorly understood. Even countries are in disagreement about whether or not people should be encouraged to feed birds. For instance, in the UK, people are actually encouraged to participate in bird feeding activities because this has allowed the red kite population to recolonize urban areas. In contrast, however, conservation organisations in Australia discourage people to feed birds because they fear all of the potential negative effects that it may have. So with a lack of reliable knowledge, thousands of people worldwide feed birds with sincere intentions. One type of bird feeding involves the use of artificial nectar feeders to attract nectarivorous birds to gardens. The costs and benefits of these feeders also remain controversial, however. On the one hand, they could be beneficial by facilitating nectarivore presence in urban areas and allowing gardens to act as stepping stones between natural habitat fragments, and supplementing bird diets when floral resources are scarce. This may then facilitate their adaptation to anthropogenic shifts such as climate and land use change. However, this may come at a cost if they attract birds away from the plants they pollinate. Nectar feeders could therefore disrupt bird-plant pollination interactions, which could lead to reduced seed set in nearby populations. To date, the impact of artificial nectar feeding has only been studied in the Americas, where feeders have been found to be associated with significant increases in hummingbird and bat numbers. But whether this translates into decreased or increased flower visits remain debated and largely unknown. Plant-pollinator relationships form crucial components in the web of life. Most flowering plants rely on animals for their reproductive success and in return reward the pollinators with nectar. Pollinators choose to feed on flowers that provide them the greatest reward for the least amount of effort. And so the foraging behavior of pollinators drives the speciation of flowering plants as well as the other way around. To promote successful pollination, bird-pollinated plants have evolved attractive floral structures and large volumes of nectar to satisfy the high energetic demands of their bird pollinators. And nectar-feeding birds show a similar dependence on nectar-bearing flowers. Over 920 bird species across the world are recognized as prominent pollinators. Among these are the hummingbirds in North and South America, as well as honey-eaters in Australia and sunbirds and sugarbirds in Africa. Nectar-feeding bird species have long, narrow bills that are often curved to match the shape of the flowers they feed on. Bird-pollinated plants tend to have tubular, reddish flowers that contain large volumes of dilute nectar. Plants pollinated by sunbirds have a sturdy perch so that sunbirds can perch while they feed, but plants pollinated by hummingbirds lack these perches because hummingbirds hover as they feed. Nectarivorous birds can identify flowers that contain high reward and quality nectar using visual signals and spatial memory as foraging strategy. This is the first study to consider the effects of nectar feeders on an African bird pollination system. This study was conducted in the Cape Peninsula of the Cape Floristic region, where birds are important pollinators because a disproportionately large percentage of plant species depend on their pollination. I carried out a feeding experiment in 18 gardens across 4 suburbs, namely Scarborough, Simonstown, Glencairn and Clovelly, where nectar feeders are often available in gardens. In this study, I focused on 4 nectar specialist bird species that naturally occur in the Cape Peninsula, namely the orange-breasted sunbird, malachite sunbird, southern double-collared sunbird, and the Cape sugarbird. The amethyst sunbird was not recorded during the study, although you might be able to spot them in your gardens from time to time. The relatively short-billed orange-breasted sunbird and the long-billed Cape sugarbird are both endemic to the Cape. Here, the orange-breasted sunbirds are the main pollinators of bird-pollinated erica species, whereas the Cape sugarbird pollinates many members from the Proteaceae family. The malachite sunbird and the southern double-collared sunbird inhabit a larger area of southern Africa than the two endemic species, and therefore forage on a wider variety of plant families. But even so, the malachite sunbird is the exclusive pollinator of many members from the Iridaceae and Amaryllidaceae families. Nectar feeders also attract generalist bird species that include nectar in their diets. So to fully understand the effects of nectar feeders on bird and plant communities, I assessed all bird feeding groups. Some of the nectar opportunistic species that I recorded during this study includes the Cape weaver, Cape white-eye, Cape bulbul, and southern masked weaver. Nectar feeders may also indirectly affect birds that do not include nectar in their diets. This may be due to competition, for example for nesting sites, and therefore I also recorded abundances of non-nectarivorous bird species. Ericas are primary food sources for nectarivorous birds. These bird-pollinated ericas produce clusters of long tubular flowers, whereas ericas with small round flowers are usually pollinated by insects. Erica species provide a useful system to test effects on pollination because their visitation rate is easy to measure. For this study, I focused on the co-flowering Erica plucinetti and Erica abiatina. Erica abiatina is endemic to the Cape Peninsula and flowers from midsummer to late spring, whereas Erica plucinetti is common in Fynbos in the Western Cape and mainly flowers in winter in this study area. The principal research question of this study was, do artificial nectar feeders in suburban gardens affect bird-plant interactions in the Cape Fynbos? To answer this, I aim to test whether nectar feeders affect local bird abundance and distribution, and whether this affects local erica pollinator visitation rate. I hypothesized that nectar feeders attract nectarivorous birds away from natural vegetation towards gardens, and that this disrupts the pollination processes of erica communities. I conducted bird observations at varying distances from the gardens into the natural vegetation. At each site, bird surveys were conducted in 4 plots: the garden, 50 meters from the garden, 100 meters from the garden, and 150 meters from the garden. I alternated the presence and absence of feeders in these gardens, comparing bird abundance between sites with and without feeders. Each feeder garden received 4 feeders and remained there for 7 days. The feeders were filled with a 1:4 sugar-to-water solution, which is comparable to the concentration found in South African bird-pollinated flowers. Feeders were refilled regularly so that there was a continuous supply of sugar water. I did not use a red dye or food colorant in the solution because this is thought to be harmful to the birds and is actually unnecessary anyway because, like the feeders I used in this study, a red base, a red nozzle, or decorations are enough to attract the birds' attention. Bird surveys only started on day 4 so that there was enough time for the birds to acclimatize to the feeders. 20-minute bird counts were then conducted in each plot on day 4 and repeated on day 7. I estimated bird abundance as the maximum number of individuals for each species seen or heard at the same time during the 20 minutes. Observations were only conducted during the peak bird activity hours, either in the morning, which was 1 to 4 hours after sunrise, or in the afternoon from 4 hours before sunset. I also hypothesized that birds may rely less on nectar feeders and more on natural flower nectar during winter, when floral resources are relatively abundant in natural vegetation. So I conducted bird surveys in winter and summer to test this. To explore the possible ecological effects that nectar feeders may have on nearby Fynbos plants, I measured Erica plucinetti and Erica abiatina visitation rate at different distances from the edge of the gardens into the natural vegetation. I collected visitation rate data only in winter because Erica floral abundance was too low in summer. I measured visitation rate before feeders were placed in the feeder gardens on day 1, as well as after the feeders were stationed there for the week. At each site, I identified 1 to 6 patches of ericas, each patch containing between 1 to 6 erica plants. To measure the bird visitation of each plant, I inspected the anther ring status. If the anther ring was still closed, the flower was considered to be unvisited. If the anther ring was broken, the flower was considered to be visited by a pollinator. And now for the results. The 4 nectar specialist species responded differently to the suburban environment when feeders were absent, such that the suburban environment acted as a barrier to some species, but not to others. Southern double-collared sunbirds were abundant in suburban gardens, regardless of the presence of nectar feeders, confirming their more generalist habits. In contrast, the suburban edge acted as a barrier for orange-breasted sunbirds when feeders were absent, confirming that they are sensitive to the urban environment. Malachite sunbirds rarely occurred in gardens and natural areas up to 150 meters from the urban edge when feeders were absent. This is likely because long-tubed flowers, which usually contains more nectar and are preferred by malachite sunbirds, were rare in these areas and more abundant higher in the mountains. Surprisingly, the Cape sugarbird was the most abundant nectar specialist species in gardens when feeders were absent. But when feeders were present, however, densities of all 4 species were much greater in gardens compared to gardens without feeders, and even greater than in any of the natural vegetation plots. So the attraction of the feeders was overall stronger than the aversion of the urban environment, even to otherwise sensitive bird species such as the orange-breasted sunbirds. So attracting nectar specialist birds with nectar feeders may increase the capacity of suburban areas to support avian pollinators. However, the presence of nectar feeders also decreased bird densities in the natural vegetation. Except for the malachite sunbird, their densities actually increased in the natural vegetation close to gardens, but this is likely at the cost of decreasing their densities in natural areas further away. It is also important to note that nectar feeders attracted nectar specialist species over both seasons, regardless of the floral abundance in natural vegetation. This finding is particularly important considering that feeders drew them away from natural vegetation. This suggests that nectar specialists may be choosing feeders over native flowers, even when flowers are abundant. With this in mind, it is possible that they are decreasing their visitation to local erica flowers when feeders are present, but I will get to this shortly. Unlike nectar specialists, opportunistic nectarivores preferred gardens over natural habitat, irrespective of nectar feeder presence, suggesting that other features of gardens also attract nectar opportunistic birds, such as exotic garden plants that carry fruits and seeds, and more structure for perching and nesting. But like nectar specialists, feeders also increase their abundance in gardens and slightly decrease their densities in natural vegetation in both winter and summer. So nectar feeders could also affect pollination services of plant species specialized for opportunistic nectarivores, such as aloe species, for example. There was no significant effect of feeders on non-nectarivores, at least in the short periods over which these experiments were run. It may be that over longer periods, non-nectarivores could be negatively affected by the increased abundance of nectarivores through competition for non-nectar resources like nesting sites or other food sources. And now for the effects of feeders on erica visitation. I found that feeders in gardens negatively affected visitation to Erica plucaneti flowers. On average, birds visited 16% fewer flowers at feeder versus control sites during the experiment. This effect did not vary with distance and was still detectable at 300 meters. Future studies could clarify the exact distance over which feeders affect its visitation, especially considering that there is evidence of feeders negatively affecting hummingbird pollinated plants up to 3 kilometers. In contrast to Erica plucaneti, however, Erica aviatina experienced no detectable change in sunbird visitation. This may reflect that it is the preferred food source at the site, potentially due to its higher nectar concentrations compared to Erica plucaneti. So in conclusion, nectar feeders facilitated the crossing of urban-sensitive nectarivores into suburbia, suggesting that the attraction to nectar feeders can overcome the aversion to the urban environment. From the perspective of enhancing biodiversity in city regions, increasing the capacity of suburban areas to support avian pollinators may appear to be positive. However, nectar feeders also altered the local distribution ranges of sunbirds, regardless of floral abundance in neighboring vegetation. And this altered their visitation rates to at least one of the two bird-pollinated species considered in the study, possibly with consequences for its seed set, since seed set in Erica plucanetti relies primarily on sunbird pollination, although this would need further investigation. Seemingly inconsequential human activities like attracting birds with feeders is unlikely to threaten entire plant populations, but it could exacerbate existing anthropogenic pressures on pollination systems at city edges. So this study highlights the importance of considering the unintended effects of supplementary feeding on the surrounding environment. Longer-term studies are still needed to determine whether continuous feeding will permanently reshape bird communities and their ranges. Alternatively, bird numbers may plateau due to interspecific competition or increased predation risk. Longer-term exposure to nectar feeders could provide enough time for nectarivorous birds to form dominance hierarchies around feeders. And as competition increases and dominant individuals monopolize feeders, subordinate individuals may find the surrounding flowers increasingly attractive, eventually neutralizing the initial negative effect on Erica plucanetti visitation, for instance. Future studies should also consider the impact of nectar feeders on bird ranges at a landscape scale, since feeders may draw birds from considerable distances, affecting ecosystems deeper in natural habitat. This study also focused only on long-tubed Erica species, but other plant families may also be affected by nectar feeders, since feeders not only influence the abundance of the main pollinator of Erica species, which is the orange-breasted sunbird, but also that of the longer-billed nectar specialist species. Prolonged exposure to nectar feeders may have additional consequences for bird communities not considered in this study and would need further investigation. For example, long-term use of feeders may increase disease spread as progressively more individuals from a variety of species use the same resource. Nectar feeders may also influence breeding success in the long run. One of my supervisors, Dr. Anina Kutsia, recently published a paper in which she showed that there is a higher incidence of sunbirds and sugarbirds breeding in gardens with feeders. And this could in turn negatively affect non-nectarivorous species as they directly compete with nectarivores for nesting sites and other food sources. A common concern is that birds could become reliant on supplementary feeding if food is provided too frequently, but Anina also demonstrated that this is usually not the case. Another concern is whether feeders provide optimal nutrition value for birds. Anina demonstrated that the average sugar-water concentration in feeders are relatively close to that found in natural nectar, so artificial nectar is probably of similar nutritional quality to natural nectar. Although artificial feeders lack minerals, amino acids, and some microbes that natural flower nectar contains, these are usually in small quantities and probably merely supplement the adequate nutrition obtained by feeding on insects. Aggregation of high densities of birds around feeders may also increase predation risk. Given that pets occur at far higher densities than natural predators, gardens with feeders can act as sinks if predation by pets is high. The presence of pets can also create an atmosphere of fear, leading to reduced reproductive fitness. So while there are still a lot of questions about the effects of nectar feeders, we can at least contribute by making sure to clean our feeders regularly and by using only normal sugar, not sweetener or colorants. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. That was most interesting. And it seems to me that it probably is a better idea not to be using nectar feeders because there's so many unknowns there. But let us see if anyone has questions that they would like to ask. I've asked that people put questions into the chat box. So if you have got a question for Monique, can you please type it into the chat box as quickly as possible? I should have said that before she even started speaking.
I can also just give my opinion, I suppose.
Yes.
So there's still a lot of questions around nectar feeders, and this is the first study in Africa. So there's a huge lack of information, not just about the effects of feeders on the plants, but also on the birds themselves. But while, I mean, better safe than sorry is my opinion. So there is a more natural way of attracting birds, and that's creating bird-friendly gardens. So instead of putting artificial feeders in your garden, rather plant plants that attract these birds naturally and make sure that they're native plants. But if you do want to use a feeder, then just make sure that it is cleaned regularly so that you use it responsibly, so that you don't harm the birds themselves.
Are there any questions for Monique? Johan, would you be able to propose a thank you to Monique? It looks as though there aren't any questions. And then we will.
I see there is a question now.
Has the one come in?
Yeah, somebody said, I think I put too much sugar in. How much should it be? So the concentration in the equivalent to the concentration in natural flower nectar would be 4 parts water, 1 part sugar. So that's what I also used in my feeders during the studies.
Any other questions? Quite interesting, Monique, is that came into my chat box after you had already said that there was something there.
Are those varieties, Erica varieties, easy to grow in suburban gardens? Ericas are in general a bit difficult to grow in gardens because they're quite finicky, but you do get, I, for instance, have bird pollinating Ericas in my garden, the Erica discolor, which is sold at your local nursery, hopefully, but I think I got mine from Stodels. And it seems to be doing really well. And we have quite clay soil, which is usually not too great for gardening, I think. But it's doing well. So I would suggest trying that out.
Can you just?
And if you think that your soil might not be right, or you maybe don't have a garden, then putting it in a pot might work.
Right. I think we're getting any more questions in, Monique, and I think that's testimony to a very clear and fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
I mean, the graphics, you know, the thoroughness of which you you know, covered the area, and the interest with the variety of questions which are still unanswered certainly you know, stimulates the imagination. So I sincerely hope that this is a start of a lot more research for you and for Percy Fitz. But thank you. That was really most enjoyable and a scientific piece of research made very easy to be understood by lay people. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, I echo thank you.
Priscilla, could I suggest that we ask everyone to unmute and also put their videos on, then we can see who's here?
I've just sent that message and I see that I've got somebody just joining now. She obviously did not get the message. that we were meeting early. Can you all unmute? I've invited you all to unmute your mics and your videos. Unmute your mics and videos. We so seldom get an opportunity to talk to each other. So Dave, you can unmute yours as well. Harold, unmute. And oh gosh, there's several people coming in now who obviously did not get the message that we were running early. So, Colin Atwell's wife, Melody, has just had an operation. Colin, how is he?
Priscilla, she's doing extremely well. She's already been into the nurse's station and reorganized everything. You know what she's like. And with some luck, she will be coming home tomorrow. Everything has gone extremely well and smoothly, and we're grateful for that. So yeah, I'll fetch her tomorrow from the hospital. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic. And I see Penny Dichmont there. Penny, congratulations on your nomination to the committee, and we look forward to having you there. We really do.
Thank you very much.
So, come along.
Thank
I
you.
don't want to be the only person speaking. Oh, here's Vernon coming into the waiting room. Many apologies to those who did not get the message that we were starting. Load shedding is beginning at 8 o'clock in Claremont. So I apologize to those 4 people that have just joined the meeting. We did send out an emergency e-newsletter. So that's to Marilyn and Vernon, and there was somebody else who's just joined. Now, everybody's so quiet. You haven't seen one another's faces for so long.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back into the birding. This lockdown situation has been pretty tedious, I must say. But when I saw Monique's fantastic presentation tonight, I just thought, man, you just got to get out there and do it. Well done, Monique. You've re-inspired me.
Thanks so much.
Monique, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
All of your investigation was done on what I would call peripheral gardens, which are verging on natural. Is there any, is it better or is it more ethical to have feeders in your garden if you're far away from the urban edge?
Yes, so I think so, because the closer you are to the natural vegetation, the larger your effect will be, because these birds are quite sensitive. So I would think that a feeder in the middle of the city would probably not attract so many birds. So the effect will probably not be that great. So, and we also have to consider that interaction with nature is really important, and it is, you know, interacting with birds, especially in gardens, inspires people. And during this COVID time, it was really evident that a lot of people in cities without gardens struggled because they could not interact with nature. So I wouldn't suggest entirely taking away their chance to interact. So I would say that people in the middle of a city or in a concrete jungle, to feed birds is probably not that big of an effect on the vegetation, but then again, do it wisely and responsibly so that you're not harming the birds themselves.
Thank you.
Bit of a silly question, but when we fill our feeder, we tend to use raw sugar or brown sugar. Is there any difference between refined white sugar and brown sugar? I suppose there's nothing really to note, but just a question.
I don't think there is that big of a difference. I was told that it is fine to use brown sugar, but I know for a fact that the white sugar, table sugar, is exactly the same sucrose chemically that you get in natural flour. But I don't think brown sugar is probably that much different. So I think it should be fine still.
Okay.
I must check up on that.
But of course, people mustn't use artificial sweeteners.
Yes, that is apparently very harmful. And those colorants as well.
Yeah.
So colorants and sweeteners are very harmful. They can actually cause, there was actually recently recorded that a feeder killed at least one sugar bird that just died right by the feeder. So because there was sweetener in it.
Okay. The